Hi everyone, my name is Zanita Akinkugbe and this is my final project for religion and pop culture this semester. I'm really excited to be sharing this with everyone. The research that I have done and the research that I was able to make through my work is really important to me, especially as an international student from the African continent. It was interesting to see these data and these trends and be able to make something out of it and draw connections through what I've learned in this class. For as long as I have lived, naming has been a profound and sacred aspect of my Yoruba culture. It is as essential as a child's first cry or first steps. Unlike many other Nigerian cultures, a name in Yoruba culture is not just an identifier, but a prophecy of one's future. Approximately 8 days after birth, family members gather for a naming ceremony. In Yoruba, it's called Isomoloruko, where they bestow names they believe are befitting and prophetic. These names are rich in symbolism. They often celebrate resilience, highlight family heritage, and are uniquely tailored to each individual, frequently centered around God. While the naming process may seem long and tedious with many family members coming with many different names, it has always been a grounding tradition in Yoruba culture. However, there's a shift occurring. Parents are now increasingly choosing to give their children Western Christian names over the traditional cultural ones. In my video, I will argue that the increased adoption of Western Christian names as a form of pop culture is challenging the indigenous cultural identities embedded in African Christianity. This is not to say that this is disrupting the African Christianity that already exists. It is just me noting a trend that has been occurring. Christianity is indigenous to Africa and has always existed, even before colonialism. For me, this increasing trend underscores the complex interplay of colonial legacy, religious influences, and modern cultural dynamics. As we embark on the exploration of my thesis, I'll begin by presenting my academic definition of religion. This definition has been meticulously constructed and reconstructed over the past few weeks, reflecting a rigorous academic process over the 4 weeks in Professor Tapman's class. To me, religion embodies a multifaceted tapestry that reflects individual or group beliefs, practices, or engagements. It encompasses charisma, routine activities/habits, and culturally relevant engagements, influencing values while promoting community. I found that with the exploration of my current thesis, my definition of religion fits perfectly into this discussion of the adoption of Western Christian names in African Nigerian culture. And it will be reflected in the elements of the arguments that I make. For example, we can see the elements of the tapestry in many different family members giving different names when children are born, the group beliefs/practices when the naming ceremony occurs. Charisma being how big of an event the naming ceremony is, and routine activities to see that this happens with every new child that is born. It is also culturally relevant, influences the values, and also promotes the ability for families to come together, creating this sense of community. To understand why Nigerians are beginning to adopt Western Christian names, we must first understand the history between the world of the West, Christianity, and the role colonialism played in bringing these two together. The colonial history of Nigeria saw the introduction of a new Christianity by Western missionaries, which led to significant cultural changes not only in just the religion that existed prior to Western Christian missionaries. According to the scholar Tony Falolala, the colonial period deeply ingrained Western education and religion into the Nigerian society, which in turn made English names synonymous with a Christian identity. As time passed, the Christian names that were apparent in the families of colonists became adopted by Nigerians. Traditions began to blend, often then resulting in hybrid names. For instance, English Christian names were paired with traditional surnames. You can see me as an example, Zanita Akinkugbe. Although Zanita is not a Christian name, I have many friends, such as my cousin, who has a Christian name, Christiana, paired with a traditional surname, Kolafabi. This is very apparent in the world that we are living today. According to census data provided by the National Population Commission of Nigeria, there has been a significant increase in the number of children given English first names. For example, in more urban areas like Lagos, where I'm from, the most populous city, and Abuja, the state capital, over 60% of newborns were given English first names in the past decade in comparison to less than 30% in the 1980s. This shift highlights the increased adoption of Western naming Western Christian naming in the Nigerian society. Similarly, demographic data from the World Bank 2019 underlined the trend of urbanization and its impact on cultural practices. As more Nigerians move to urban centers, the adoption of Western Christian names increased. But why? In his work on Nigerian culture, Daniel Smith notes that adopting Western Christian names is often seen as a way to gain social prestige and global recognition. This trend is not unique to Nigeria, it is happening worldwide, but it is responsible for some of the changes that we see today in naming and other traditional practices in Nigeria. The adoption of English names is often perceived as alignment with modernity, with many Nigerians associating English names with opportunities for social economic advancements. Like Falola said, the perception is deeply rooted in the colonial history of Nigeria, where English names were linked to education and upward social mobility. In his work, Falola emphasizes that Western education was seen as a pathway to success during the colonial era. Most people believe that once they adopted the Christian West names that the colonizers had during their time of work, they had a higher chance of getting into these higher places, which was true. Akiyemi further elaborates on this point by discussing syncretism in Nigerian naming practices. While the tradition and religious names often carry deep and cultural meanings, English names are viewed as more cosmopolitan and universally acceptable. This meaning that many people are more likely to gravitate to an African with an English name but with a traditional surname. The duality reflects a broader trend of cultural negotiation, trading in one culture for the benefit of something else. Smith further boosts this point when he points out that in professional and academic settings, English names facilitate smoother interactions and broader acceptance, a fact that I can attest to myself. However, it is essential to note that this popular culture trend is only rising in areas where exposure to global culture is more prevalent. In areas where there's not that much access to multimedia, social media, and all these things going on in the world where the West has influence, no one is slacking on cultural identity or traditional practices. Another angle that I chose to look at this from would be pop culture, but with the media we consume, such as movies, films, music, and such. An example is Nollywood. Nollywood is a Nigerian classification of film famously known for its humor and its different translations or existence in Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa, the three major ethnicities in Nigeria. However, Nollywood has moved on from these to now making its own English version, which is not bad or something terrible, but it just shows how we've moved from accepting or using our traditional culture to moving towards a more westernized and a socially acceptable thing. Characters that were once found relatable through languages, names, and such now have English names and unrealistic storylines that do not really pertain to Nigerians. Here I will insert clips comparing TV shows over the years, starting with Papa Ajasco, which is a show that I used to watch growing up. One of the things to note is that in this show, Papa Ajasco, the clip that I am showing over here shows all the characters with their different African names and all the things that are truly authentically African. There's not that many characters with many Nigerian names, as we can see over here. There's all these characters that have like very Nigerian, very African names. And now we move on to one of the most recent shows that has been produced from Nollywood, which is Far From Home. Far From Home is a show that talks about like school life and such and such. However, we can note that all the main characters in this show have very English names, very modern names, but the scholarship recipient is the one with the African name, the traditional name, and we see how everyone just turns around to look at him because no one really has his name. The person beside him has a very Western Christian name, which is Mark. Another person has Zena. Another person has Carmen. Not necessarily Christian, but very Western. Another way that I chose to look at this was something that we discussed in class, was through mega churches, pastors, and stuff like that. We didn't necessarily discuss the naming aspect, but from my angle, what I noticed is that in Nigeria, pastors used to have really traditional names. I remember my pastor had a really long and hard traditional name that I couldn't pronounce when I was really young. But now that I'm older, he's changed his name to David with his last Yoruba name. And I think it's really interesting to look at this point of angle as well, because mega churches, as we discussed in class, have reached a massive audience they've gained and a mass following, these celebrity pastors, and looking at Nigerian youth growing up to see these kind of figures, growing up with these very English named, westernized named, they're more inclined to want to be named in such a way. They're more inclined to name their children in such a way because it is, at the end of the day, still Christian. It's still very strong in their religion. It still promotes like Christianity. However, it isn't as authentically in Nigeria as things used to be before, which is not necessarily bad, but it's also just something that I took from the case study and kind of had a different spin and looked at it from a different angle to be able to support my argument that I made and the arguments of the other scholars that I cited in my work. However, for me, my issue lies in the future of cultural preservation and identity. I believe that the continued adoption of Western Christian names or Western names increases tension and confusion on how we can maintain traditional cultural practices. While the adoption of these Western Christian names can be seen as a sign of modernity and the spread of Christianity, it is also a path for us to lose our cultural heritage. Upon the initial research that I have done, I believe that it should be further explored. If I get the opportunity to continue with my aspirations of the Africana Studies minor, I'll be looking at this more in depth, not only in the Christian religion, but the Islam religion. This would be an exciting line of study to continue with, especially in understanding pop culture's role in shaping our cultural norms these days. In conclusion, this shift is not merely a matter of changing preferences. It indicates deeper societal transformations influenced by colonial legacy globalization, the spread of Christianity, and the influence of Western pop culture. The perception that English names are inherently Christian underscores the lasting impact of colonial missionary activities and the subsequent integration of Western education and religious practices into Nigerian societies. Scholars such as Falola, Akinyemi, and Smith have highlighted with data how this syncretism has led to nuanced cultural identity, where traditional and Western elements coexist and interact. This duality is evident in how Nigerian parents have navigated naming, language, teaching, and so on, balancing the cultural hybrid with the pressures of modernities and global recognition. Pop culture further contributes to the shift through Western media, films, music, and social media, unintentionally promoting English or English Christian names as a part of international identity. Additionally, religious influences also play a vital role in this transformation. The rapid growth of evangelical Christianity in Nigeria has reinforced the association of English names with Christian identity, because there's not that many traditional names that are seen as Christian or promoted as Christian that we see today. We see mainly English Christian names being at the forefront when people are doing confirmations or when people are engaging in very religious activities. As seen in surveys and studies, many Nigerians adopt English names to signify their religious beliefs and to align with the perceived global Christian community. This trend, I notice, illustrates the dialogue between religion and pop culture, where religious practices adapt and shape cultural expressions and the recent dialogue that we have today, such as now, which is why I termed my work and my thesis under the branch of dialogue between religion and pop culture out of the four. Because while there is religion in pop culture and there's pop culture in religion, this field of study that I have chosen particularly relies on the dialogue between these two sections. I really had a blast making this presentation and doing the research for this work, and I'm so happy that I have the opportunity to share this with you all. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day.